It was just a regular weekend getaway with my friends. We rented an Airbnb, a quaint, charming place in the countryside. Everything seemed perfect, the house cozy and welcoming. But things took an eerie turn. We arrived, eager to settle in. The host had left detailed instructions, and everything appeared tidy and well organized. We unpacked, and as we were exploring the house, we stumbled upon a locked door. Curiosity got the best of us. We were intrigued by what might be behind that door. It felt odd, a locked room in a rental. We joked about it at first, wondering if it was just a storage area. But the curiosity lingered. We asked the host about the locked room, but they seemed evasive, dismissing it as part of the property's structure. It seemed odd, but we let it slide. As the night approached, the locked room kept nagging at us. We decided to take matters into our own hands. My friend, Tim, had a knack for lockpicking. With a few attempts, the door creaked open. The room was dusty and dimly lit by a small window. We found old furniture covered in sheets, giving the place an abandoned vibe. But something caught our attention, a locked wooden chest in the corner. We were nervous but also excited, feeling like kids on an adventure. Tim got to work again, trying to unlock the chest. When it finally opened, we were met with a collection of old, worn-out journals. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting barely legible. They were journals belonging to the previous owner, detailing their life in this house. The more we read, the more unsettling it became. The journals spoke of strange occurrences, of hearing whispers in the night, and feeling an eerie presence. The entries got darker, detailing events that seemed straight out of a horror movie. The former owner wrote about waking up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone was watching them. They spoke of a hidden room in the house, warning to never enter it and the horrors they discovered within. We were spooked, but our curiosity pushed us further. We scoured the house, looking for this hidden room. After a while, we discovered a loose floorboard, revealing a hidden compartment underneath. With trembling hands, we pried it open. It led to a narrow staircase, descending into darkness. We hesitated, but were too curious to turn back. We took a single flashlight and ventured into the unknown. The air was musty and heavy, and the staircase seemed endless. It felt like we were descending into the bowels of some forgotten nightmare. The flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. At the end of the stairs, we found ourselves in a small, windowless room. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, and the air felt colder. It was unsettling, and a sense of dread washed over us. In the corner, we discovered a small chest, similar to the one upstairs. Tim unlocked it, revealing a collection of ancient-looking artifacts. They felt ominous, like they held some hidden power. Suddenly, a draft of cold air hit us, and we heard faint whispers. Panic surged through us, and we turned to leave, but the door had vanished. We were trapped in this eerie room, surrounded by darkness. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the room. Fear consumed us, and we frantically searched for a way out. We tried the walls, the ceiling, anything to find an escape. Just when we thought it was hopeless, the door reappeared. We bolted out, rushing up the stairs and slamming the hidden compartment shut. We ran out of the house, leaving our belongings behind. We never returned to that Airbnb. The experience haunted us, and we couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. We booked an Airbnb for a short vacation. It was a lovely cottage by the woods, secluded and picturesque. The place felt safe and cozy, or at least, that's what we thought until things went terribly wrong. On the second night, we heard a noise downstairs. It sounded like someone moving around. We brushed it off as creaky old house sounds, trying to reassure ourselves. But then we heard it again, louder this time, footsteps, distinct and purposeful. My heart raced as I realized we weren't alone. We whispered to each other, trying to figure out our next move. We tiptoed towards the staircase, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was downstairs. It was pitch black, and the only light came from the moon through the windows. There was a silhouette, a figure moving stealthily. Panic took over as we watched this intruder rifling through our belongings. Fear consumed us, our breaths shallow and ragged. We knew we had to act fast. I crept back to our room, searching for my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, growing closer. My heart pounded, and I froze, trying to control my breathing. The door creaked open, and there they were, an unfamiliar figure, cloaked in darkness. Their eyes glinted in the dim light, and a chill ran down my spine. They moved silently, almost as if they were stalking prey. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't notice me. But they did. Their eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a surge of terror. There was something sinister in that gaze, something that sent shivers down my spine. The intruder's lips twisted into a sinister smile. They made no move, just stood there, watching, studying us. It felt like an eternity before they slowly turned and walked away. Relief washed over me, but the fear lingered. We barricaded ourselves in the room, hoping to wait it out until help arrived. But then, a scratching at the door. Panic flooded back in. This wasn't over. We heard whispers, muffled and haunting. We huddled together, trying to keep quiet and make sense of what was happening. The noises continued, getting louder and more frantic. Fear gnawed at us, the feeling of helplessness unbearable. Minutes turned into hours, and the noises stopped abruptly. We stayed locked in that room, praying for the dawn to break. When the first light filtered through the windows, we mustered the courage to venture out. The house was in disarray. Our belongings were scattered, drawers emptied, possessions strewn across the floor. It was a scene of chaos, and the sense of violation was overwhelming. We called the police, explaining what had transpired. They arrived promptly, but the intruder was long gone, leaving no trace behind. We packed our things, feeling shaken and violated, and left the Airbnb immediately. The experience haunted us. We couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, of being violated in our safe space. It wasn't just a break-in. There was something sinister about the intruder's intent, a lurking danger beyond theft, something that sent chills down our spines whenever we remembered that night at the Airbnb. I booked an Airbnb for a weekend getaway with my friends. The house was tucked away in a remote area, boasting a rustic charm that initially felt inviting. But as the evening set in, things started to get weird. Upon arrival, we were greeted by our host, an elderly man with an unsettling demeanor. He handed us a list of house rules, but these weren't your typical guidelines. They were bizarre and felt oppressive. We shrugged it off, thinking it was part of the Airbnb experience. As the night progressed, we decided to test the waters and bend a rule or two. It seemed harmless at first, but it didn't take long for us to feel an ominous shift in the atmosphere. The air grew heavy, and an inexplicable sense of dread began to loom over us. The consequences of breaking the rules were eerie. Small things began to happen, lights flickered, doors creaked open on their own, and we heard inexplicable whispers in the dead of night. It was unnerving, to say the least. The house itself seemed to enforce the rules. Whenever we crossed the line, a sense of dread would envelop us, a feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. We couldn't shake off the eerie sensation that the house had a life of its own. One evening, in a moment of jest, we violated a crucial rule. Almost instantly, an unsettling silence enveloped the house. The air grew thick, and a chilling cold seeped through the rooms. We knew something was off. The atmosphere was charged with an inexplicable menace. As the night progressed, strange occurrences became more frequent. Shadows seemed to dance in the corners of our vision, and odd noises echoed through the halls. Fear gnawed at our minds, and the once cozy house now felt like a labyrinth of terror. Attempting to leave proved futile. Every time we reached the door, it led us back to the same hallway, trapping us in an endless loop. Panic set in as we realized we were caught in a maze of the supernatural. The house itself seemed to have a malevolent consciousness, as if it reveled in our fear. It toyed with us, playing on our nerves and exploiting our terror. The very walls seemed to whisper warnings, a chilling reminder of the consequences of our disobedience. Each passing moment felt like an eternity, and our fears morphed into a nightmarish reality. We were prisoners in a house that exuded a sinister energy, enforcing its own twisted set of rules that we were bound to follow. Exhaustion and fear wore us down. We were at the mercy of an unseen force that delighted in tormenting us. The hours dragged on, and despair settled in, a feeling of being trapped in a horror story with no escape in sight. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, dawn broke. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and we found ourselves standing outside the house, shaken and disoriented. We couldn't comprehend what we had experienced, the inexplicable terror that gripped us in that house. To this day, the memory lingers, a haunting reminder of the chilling encounter at that Airbnb, a place where the rules weren't just meant to be followed, but had dire, horrifying consequences. We were excited about our weekend getaway, booked in an old house on Airbnb. The house had character, an antique charm that drew us in. It was nestled in a remote part of town, surrounded by thick woods. But our excitement faded when we discovered a hidden door in the corner of the basement. Curiosity got the better of us, and we pried it open. A dank odor wafted out as the door creaked on its hinges, revealing a dark staircase descending into the unknown. I hesitated, but my wife's curiosity pushed us forward. We descended into the dimly lit basement. The place felt eerie, old, like it held secrets from a distant past. We found dusty boxes stacked against the walls, filled with antique items and forgotten relics. The air felt heavy, like it was holding something back. Then we stumbled upon a peculiar room, different from the rest. It was smaller, tucked away in a hidden alcove. The door was bolted shut from the outside, and it sent chills down my spine. My wife's curiosity got the better of her, and she managed to pry it open. What we saw inside made our blood run cold. The room was filled with arcane symbols and old, torn photos scattered across the floor. A tattered book lay open on a table, its pages filled with cryptic writings. We both felt a sense of dread, a creeping feeling that we had disturbed something we shouldn't have. The house had a history, we could feel it. It was as though the walls held echoes of dark secrets. Our minds raced with questions about what had transpired in that basement, who had used that room, and why was it locked away. We decided to investigate further, but as the evening descended, strange things started happening. Shadows danced along the walls, odd noises echoed from the basement, and the air grew colder. We felt like unwanted guests in our own rental. That night, we heard whispers, soft at first, then growing louder. It sounded like faint chanting, distant but unmistakable. It was enough to send shivers down our spines and make us question our decision to stay. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew oppressive. It felt like something sinister was lurking in the shadows, watching our every move. The whispers persisted, haunting us, and sleep evaded us completely. The next day, we found peculiar symbols etched onto the walls of the basement. They seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The discovery terrified us, leaving us grappling with questions about the house's dark past and the secrets it held. We tried leaving, but the car wouldn't start. Panic set in, and we were trapped in that eerie house. We felt like we were being held against our will, at the mercy of something beyond our comprehension. As night fell again, the whispers returned, more pronounced this time. The air grew thick with an inexplicable presence, suffocating us with fear and uncertainty. Shadows seemed to move on their own, taking on grotesque shapes. We huddled together, trying to ward off the growing dread. But the more we tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. It felt like the house was alive, breathing, and pulsating with an ominous energy. Finally, unable to bear the terror any longer, we made a run for it, bolting out of the house, leaving our belongings behind. As we drove away, the sense of relief was palpable, but the memory of that basement, its chilling secrets, and the oppressive aura lingered, haunting us even after we left that cursed Airbnb behind. My partner and I were thrilled about our vacation aboard a cozy boat listed on Airbnb. The host, Thomas, welcomed us warmly, giving us a tour of the boat and sharing stories about his travels. He seemed amiable, affable, and we felt lucky to have such a pleasant host. But things took an eerie turn as the sun began to set. As night fell, Thomas's demeanor shifted. His friendly smile turned into an unsettling grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. His speech became erratic, and his laughter sounded almost forced, chilling us to the bone. We shrugged it off, thinking it was just fatigue from a long day. But things only got worse. His friendliness turned into an unnerving obsession with our every move. He started asking personal, invasive questions that made us uneasy. We tried to brush it off, chalking it up to his eccentricity. As the night deepened, we heard odd noises coming from below deck. It sounded like whispers, faint but unmistakable. We exchanged uneasy glances, both silently acknowledging that something wasn't right. The boat felt too quiet, too isolated in the middle of the dark waters. Then we discovered a locked door, one that Thomas had adamantly told us to avoid. Our curiosity got the better of us, and we managed to open it, revealing a room filled with unsettling objects, knives, ropes, and pictures of people, faces scratched out. Fear settled in, as we realized there was more to our host than met the eye. His smiles now felt sinister, his stories deceitful. We tried to act normal, but our gut told us to get off the boat, fast. But Thomas was everywhere. His presence felt like a looming shadow. He was watching us, anticipating our every move. The atmosphere grew tense, thick with an impending sense of danger. When we decided to leave, the boat's engine mysteriously failed. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped, at the mercy of a man whose intentions had turned nefarious. We were alone, trapped in the middle of the water with a man who wasn't who he claimed to be. That's when we saw it, a glint of malice in Thomas's eyes, a chilling expression that sent a cold shiver down our spines. We knew then that we were in grave danger. We made a desperate attempt to flee, managing to call for help using the boat's radio. As we waited for help to arrive, Thomas's behavior turned erratic, his demeanor volatile and threatening. Hours passed, and with every ticking minute, the tension escalated. Thomas grew more agitated, pacing around us with a manic energy. It was clear he had something dark planned for us. Eventually, rescue arrived, but even then, Thomas resisted, his sinister grin never fading. We were finally taken to safety, but the memory of that night, the terror of being trapped on that boat with a host whose friendliness masked a dark alter ego, haunted us for a long time. Me and my girlfriend planned a weekend getaway to this cute little Airbnb, a tiny home tucked away in a quiet wooded area. The pictures online were inviting, showcasing a cozy place surrounded by nature. The host, Evelyn, seemed nice from our online interactions. She had positive reviews, so we were looking forward to our stay. When we arrived, Evelyn greeted us warmly, but something about her felt a bit off. She was overly attentive, almost too interested in our plans and itinerary for the weekend. She'd mentioned knowing our schedule for the next day, which struck me as strange, but I brushed it off. As the day rolled on, things started getting weirder. She would show up unannounced, claiming she wanted to ensure everything was all right. It felt like she was constantly watching us, our every move. At one point, she mentioned something that she could have only known if she was eavesdropping on us. Inside the tiny home, there were strange things. Some of our belongings seemed slightly rearranged, as if someone had been going through them. I tried to keep my composure, but my girlfriend was getting increasingly anxious. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The silence was too heavy, and the darkness outside felt suffocating. We heard footsteps around the house, but whenever we checked, there was no one. I thought I saw a shadow lurking outside our window, but when I looked again, it was gone. The next day, Evelyn asked questions about our personal lives that seemed way too probing. She seemed overly invested in our relationship, our jobs, and even our future plans. It was uncomfortable. The climax came when she entered the tiny home without knocking, claiming she needed to fix something, but everything seemed fine. We felt invaded, trapped in this space with someone who was becoming more than just an overly attentive host. Her interest turned into an unnerving obsession with us. I started noticing small details that were off. A hidden camera perhaps, or maybe a microphone. Paranoia began to creep in, and we felt like we were prisoners in this tiny home. We decided to leave early, making up an excuse about an emergency back home. But Evelyn insisted on knowing our exact plans, almost desperate for us to stay. Her insistence was frightening, and we hurriedly packed our things, feeling like we were escaping something ominous. Once we left, the relief was palpable, but the feeling of being watched lingered. We couldn't shake the chilling sense that Evelyn was still keeping tabs on us, even after we were miles away. It took a while for the eerie feeling to fade, but even now, the memory of that weekend remains etched in our minds. The unsettling realization that we were at the mercy of a host who crossed the line between hospitality and an unnerving obsession still sends shivers down my spine. Me and my friends decided to take a break and booked an Airbnb for a weekend getaway. It was a beautiful house in a secluded area, exactly what we needed for relaxation. The host, Richard, seemed like a friendly and accommodating person based on his profile and reviews. On our arrival, Richard welcomed us warmly. He was kind, but had an unsettling intensity in his gaze that made me slightly uncomfortable. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. The house was gorgeous, spacious, and had all the amenities we could ask for. As the night progressed, Richard's behavior started getting odd. He would linger around the house longer than necessary, making small talk that seemed forced. There was something about his demeanor that felt wrong, almost menacing. It made everyone uneasy, but we didn't want to be rude. Things took a dark turn when we realized the doors were locked from the outside. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. Richard appeared with a sinister smile, explaining that he had hidden the keys, turning our weekend retreat into a nightmare. He claimed it was all part of a game and that if we wanted to leave, we had to follow his rules. He handed us a set of cryptic instructions, informing us that the keys were hidden somewhere in the house and that we had to solve puzzles to find them. Fear gripped us as we realized we were prisoners in this game orchestrated by our seemingly friendly host. We had no choice but to participate if we ever wanted to leave. The atmosphere turned tense, with everyone frantically searching for clues, trying to solve the bizarre puzzles scattered around the house. It became clear that the game was designed to torment us. The puzzles were intricate, leading to dead ends and false hints. It felt like Richard was toying with us, relishing our fear and confusion. Hours passed, and the strain of the situation started to weigh heavily on us. The house that once seemed inviting now felt like a labyrinth of terror. We were on edge, constantly watching our backs, unsure if Richard would do something more sinister. Each puzzle solved led us to another, and the stakes felt higher with every passing moment. The sense of dread intensified as we realized the danger was real. Richard's twisted game was pushing us to the brink, emotionally and mentally. Tensions between us rose as exhaustion and fear took their toll. We were turning against each other, suspicions clouding our judgment. The air was thick with fear and paranoia, and the clock ticking only added to the urgency. At one point, we found a note hinting at a hidden room in the house. The search for this room became our sole focus, as we believed it held the key to our escape. But the revelation upon discovering it was horrifying. It was a room filled with disturbing souvenirs, evidence of previous games Richard had orchestrated. The realization hit us like a punch to the gut. We were not the first victims. The horrors lurking in that hidden room made us sick to our stomachs. It was clear that Richard had done this before, preying on unsuspecting guests for his sick entertainment. We knew we had to get out. The adrenaline-fueled determination drove us to continue, but desperation started to set in. Time was running out, and Richard's twisted game was taking its toll on our sanity. After hours of endless puzzles and mental torture, we managed to find the keys. The relief was overwhelming, but our ordeal was far from over. As we unlocked the doors and dashed out, Richard appeared, his demeanor now menacingly calm. He congratulated us on winning his game, promising that the next time would be even more thrilling. We didn't look back as we fled from that house, shaken to the core by the horrors we had endured. The trauma of that night haunted us long after. The experience left scars, a reminder of the sinister dangers lurking behind seemingly innocent facades. We reported the incident to the police, but Richard had vanished without a trace, leaving us as mere survivors of a terrifying game orchestrated by a malevolent mind. We were a group of 4 friends on a weekend getaway in a remote cabin we found on Airbnb. The place was nestled among tall pines, a perfect hideaway to escape the hustle of the city. But our tranquil escape turned into a chilling nightmare. Things started to unravel on the second day. We were ready to explore the area when we realized the door was locked from the outside. Panic crept in, our keys were missing. We tried calling the host, but there was no signal. The isolation of the cabin felt suffocating. We searched every nook and cranny, hoping to find the keys, but they were nowhere to be seen. A sense of unease settled in, amplified by the absence of any way to contact the outside world. Hours went by, and we started suspecting something more sinister. Why were the keys missing, and why was the door locked from outside? Questions flooded our minds, but we had no answers. As daylight waned, our fear heightened. The isolation felt menacing, and the encroaching darkness brought a haunting unease. We were trapped, with no way to escape. Dread hung heavy in the air. We sat in the living room, our only source of light coming from the flickering fireplace. The cabin felt like it held secrets, dark and foreboding. Shadows danced on the walls, and every creak or rustle sent shivers down our spines. That's when we heard it, a soft knocking on the windows. The sound echoed through the silence, sending a chill down our spines. We hesitated to approach the window, but curiosity overpowered fear. Outside, the forest lay shrouded in darkness. We couldn't see anyone, but the knocking persisted. It felt deliberate, calculated, a haunting rhythm that seemed to mock our predicament. We gathered around, trying to devise a plan. But with no keys and no means of communication, our options were scarce. Fear settled like a heavy fog, and our minds swirled with dreadful possibilities. As night enveloped the cabin, our apprehension grew. We sought refuge in the bedroom, huddling together for comfort. Each creak of the floorboards felt like footsteps approaching, every whisper of the wind outside, a harbinger of impending danger. The hours dragged on, and our nerves were taut. Shadows danced on the walls, playing tricks on our minds. The knocking on the windows grew louder, more persistent, almost demanding attention. We barricaded the doors, our makeshift barriers providing a false sense of security. Yet every sound, every breeze that brushed against the cabin seemed to taunt us, a relentless reminder of our vulnerability. Sleep was a distant thought, replaced by an acute sense of dread. The night stretched endlessly, each minute feeling like an eternity. We prayed for the first light of dawn, longing for escape from this nightmare. Finally, as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the curtains, relief washed over us. We ventured outside, looking for any sign of the keys or any means of communication. But the knocking had stopped, and the forest stood silent, hiding its secrets. We gathered our belongings and left the cabin, feeling shaken and terrified. The host was nowhere to be seen, and we had no choice but to trek through the woods, seeking help from the nearest town. The experience haunted us, lingering like a chilling memory. We never found the keys or the truth behind our terrifying ordeal. The isolation, the locked doors, and the mysterious knocking, all of it left us feeling unnerved, with unanswered questions that plagued our minds. I never thought that a weekend getaway could turn into a terrifying ordeal. It started when my friends and I decided to rent a small apartment in a quiet town through Airbnb. The place looked cozy and was nestled in an old building. The first few days were uneventful. We spent our time exploring the town, trying out local cafes, and just enjoying a break from the routine. But one evening, while playing a card game, one of my friends noticed something odd, a seam in the floorboards that seemed out of place. Curiosity piqued, we investigated further. After some effort, we managed to pry open the floorboard, revealing a hidden compartment. The sight that greeted us sent shivers down our spines. Inside the concealed space were a few weathered photographs and peculiar items, a tarnished old knife, a tattered journal, and what seemed like a child's doll, but it was soiled and appeared sinister. The images depicted people in old-fashioned clothing, but their faces were distorted or scratched out. We couldn't fathom what we were seeing. The picture seemed ominous, the journal was filled with cryptic writings, and the doll had an eerie presence about it. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, an unsettling feeling creeping into our minds. Questions flooded our thoughts. Who did these belongings belong to? What were these disturbing artifacts doing hidden beneath the floorboards? The apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt eerie, as if it held a sinister secret. We attempted to dismiss our unease, attributing it to an overactive imagination. Yet each time we looked at those items, a sense of dread washed over us. We couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off, and the apartment's peaceful facade seemed like a facade, concealing a darker reality. That night, sleep eluded us. Thoughts of the hidden compartment and its contents lingered, casting a pall over our stay. The photographs haunted my dreams, the faces in them morphing into grotesque visages that sent shivers down my spine. As the days passed, the apartment felt increasingly oppressive. The once welcoming space now held an unsettling vibe. Shadows seemed to linger longer, and the creaks of the floorboards sounded like whispers of the past. We tried to continue our activities, exploring the town, but our minds kept returning to the hidden compartment. The mystery behind those artifacts gnawed at us, fueling our apprehension and curiosity in equal measure. Despite our unease, we decided to confront the Airbnb owner about our discovery. But when we mentioned the hidden compartment, the owner's reaction was bizarre. Unease flashed across their face before they quickly dismissed it, attributing it to old storage. Their response only deepened our suspicions. We couldn't shake off the feeling that the owner was hiding something, evading our questions instead of addressing our concerns. The atmosphere in the apartment turned stifling, and we began to feel like unwanted guests in our own temporary home. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, and every creak in the floorboards felt like a warning. Our vacation, meant for relaxation, turned into a nightmare. We couldn't wait to leave that place, the eerie vibes weighing heavily on us. The hidden compartment and its unsettling contents left an indelible mark on our minds, a disturbing experience that we'd never forget. I was excited about my Airbnb stay in a picturesque cabin near the woods. It was a much-needed break from the city buzz. The cabin was beautiful, rustic, and surrounded by serene landscapes. But my excitement took a sharp turn when I started receiving mysterious gifts and messages. The first note appeared on the cabin's doorstep, a simple piece of paper with the words, "Welcome to your temporary home." I brushed it off, thinking it was a friendly gesture from the owner. But then things got weird. The messages started arriving more frequently. Cryptic notes left under the door or slipped through the mailbox. They were unsettling, mentioning details only someone inside the cabin would know. My nerves were on edge, and paranoia set in. Then came the gifts. Small trinkets placed on the porch, a worn-out doll, a weathered book with pages filled with scribbles, and other eerie items. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, observed by someone lurking in the shadows. As days passed, the messages grew more menacing. They seemed to know my schedule, what I ate, even the books I was reading. Every time I heard a rustle outside, my heart skipped a beat, fearing it was the stalker. I reported it to the Airbnb host, but they assured me it was impossible for anyone to access the cabin. The nights were the worst. I hear faint whispers outside, and the faint creaks of the cabin echoed through the silence. I locked every door and window, but the feeling of vulnerability persisted. One evening, I returned to find a disturbing note placed on the kitchen table. It detailed my daily activities in a creepy level of detail. Fear consumed me. I was being watched constantly, and the stalkers seemed to revel in their invasive knowledge about my life. I couldn't comprehend how someone had such intimate details about me. I questioned every guest I encountered, wondering if they were behind the haunting messages and gifts. The paranoia and fear escalated each passing day, taking a toll on my mental well-being. The situation worsened when I found disturbing Polaroid pictures scattered on the floor. They were candid shots of me inside the cabin reading, cooking, even sleeping. My sense of security shattered completely. I felt like a prey in a dangerous game. With no option left, I contacted the authorities, but they couldn't find any evidence or suspect. The constant feeling of being watched never subsided, and the unexplained happenings continued, tormenting me with their ambiguity. The breaking point arrived when I heard a knock on the door at an odd hour. I peered through the blinds to see a hooded figure standing outside, holding an envelope. Panic surged through me, and I hid in a corner, trembling with fear. The figure left the envelope and disappeared into the night. With trembling hands, I opened it to find a letter, disturbingly detailed, describing my every movement that very evening. That was the last straw. I packed my bags and left the cabin, never looking back. To this day, I remain haunted by the memory of that Airbnb stay, a horrifying experience where an unknown stalker invaded my privacy, leaving me in a state of perpetual fear and vulnerability. The chilling sensation of being watched and pursued by someone who remained hidden in the shadows still sends shivers down my spine. I once booked an Airbnb for a weekend getaway with my friends. The place was a charming old cottage nestled in the countryside. The host, Mrs. Matthews, greeted us warmly when we arrived. She seemed friendly, albeit a bit reserved, and gave us a quick tour of the house before leaving us to settle in. The cottage had a peculiar charm. It was cozy, but there was an unsettling feeling lingering in the air. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if the walls held onto something dark and hidden. As the night progressed, strange things started happening. We heard eerie noises, like whispers echoing through the halls. Shadows danced in the corners of our eyes, disappearing when we turned to look. We dismissed it, attributing it to an old house settling in. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to dig into the cottage's history. We found out that the property was linked to a tragic event from years ago. A young couple had lived there, and the husband had passed away under mysterious circumstances, leaving the wife in despair. Rumors floated around town about the husband's death, hinting at foul play. Some claimed the wife had been seen wandering the property at night, whispering to herself. It sent chills down our spines, and we began to wonder if the strange occurrences were related to this tragic history. Things escalated quickly after that. Doors would slam shut on their own, objects would inexplicably move from one place to another, and a sense of unease lingered, especially at night. We couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching us. One night, as we sat by the fireplace, recounting stories, we heard a mournful wail that seemed to come from nowhere. The chilling sound echoed through the cottage, sending shivers down our spines. Fear gripped us as we tried to rationalize what we had heard. The next day, while exploring the cottage, we found a hidden room tucked away in the attic. It was a small, dusty space filled with old photographs, letters, and belongings of the deceased husband. Among the items was a diary, belonging to the husband, chronicling his descent into madness before his untimely death. The diary revealed disturbing details about the husband's obsession with the supernatural. He believed that the cottage was haunted by a malevolent presence, and he had been conducting strange rituals to communicate with the spirit world. The more we read, the more uneasy we felt. It seemed the husband's obsession had consumed him, leading to his demise. We couldn't help but wonder if his spirit lingered within the walls of the cottage, seeking solace or revenge. That night, things took a terrifying turn. We heard footsteps pacing in the hallway outside our rooms, but when we investigated, there was no one there. The air grew icy cold, and a feeling of dread settled in. We were no longer alone in the house. As the night wore on, the activity intensified. Objects flew off shelves, shadows darted across the walls, and we could feel a presence lurking in every dark corner. It felt like the cottage was alive with a malevolent energy, and we were at its mercy. In a state of panic, we decided to leave immediately. But as we made our way to the door, it slammed shut with an unnerving force, trapping us inside. Fear consumed us as we realized there was no escape. Whispers echoed through the cottage, growing louder and more menacing. Shadows danced in the dimly lit rooms, taking on sinister shapes. We felt a presence closing in on us, suffocating and terrifying. Desperation set in as we frantically searched for a way out. We tried calling for help, but our phones had no signal. The haunting sounds and eerie whispers surrounded us, instilling a deep sense of dread that we were never getting out. In a final act of desperation, we gathered in the attic, hoping to find answers or a way to break whatever hold the cottage had over us. But as we reached the attic, we found the diary open, pages flipping wildly as if moved by an unseen force. The diary's final entry spoke of a ritual, a way to appease the restless spirits that haunted the cottage. We didn't fully understand it, but in our terror, we decided to try it. We followed the ritual's instructions, hoping it would bring an end to the torment. As we completed the last step, an eerie silence fell upon the cottage. The air grew still, and the whispers ceased. For a moment, we thought it had worked, but as we turned to leave, The cottage let out a mournful wail, shaking the very foundation. The windows shattered, and a burst of unearthly light filled the room. When the light faded, we found ourselves outside, the cottage reduced to a pile of ruins. We were alive, but shaken to our core, unable to comprehend the terror we had just experienced. We fled the scene, vowing never to speak of that night again. But the memories haunted us. I had this second house, nothing fancy, just a place to make some extra cash renting it out on Airbnb. I'd had guests there before, no big deal. But then one night, I get this call from the guests, saying something's wrong with the place. They sounded scared, freaked out. So, I figure I'd better go check it out. I got there pretty quick. The night was dark and quiet, and the house looked normal from the outside. I went to the front door and knocked, but there was no answer. I had a key, so I let myself in. As soon as I walked in, I felt it. Something was off, you know? The place was dimly lit, and it was cold, but not the kind of cold you'd expect. It was like the air itself was heavy, like I was breathing something thick. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was just silence. I started to go through the rooms, looking for these guests. Everything was in order, except for one thing: the basement door was slightly open. I went down, feeling uneasy. The air got colder, and I could barely see anything. Then, I heard a noise, a sort of scraping sound. I called out again, louder this time. That's when I heard a voice, faint, coming from deeper in the basement. I went towards the voice, and that's when I saw them, the guests. They were huddled in a corner, looking terrified, staring at something I couldn't see. They were shivering, pale, wide-eyed. I asked them what happened, but they just pointed behind me. I turned around slowly, and there was someone standing there, a figure in the shadows. It was a man, but something was off about him. He was just staring at us, unmoving. I asked him what he was doing there, but he didn't answer. The silence was heavy, uncomfortable. Then, without a word, he started to move towards us, slow and deliberate. I told the guests to get behind me, trying to stay calm, but inside, I was panicking. This guy, he had this strange aura, like something was seriously wrong with him. He came closer, and I could see his face now, emotionless, cold eyes, and this eerie smile that sent shivers down my spine. I stepped back, my heart racing. He kept coming, like he wasn't even real. I tried to reason with him, to ask what he wanted, but he just kept moving, that creepy smile never leaving his face. I couldn't take it anymore. I told the guests to run, to get out of there. I wasn't going to stick around and find out what this guy was capable of. I grabbed one of the guests and bolted towards the stairs, but I could feel him following, slow and steady. As we reached the top, I looked back, and he was right there, inches away. I slammed the basement door shut, locked it, and pushed a heavy cabinet in front of it, my hands shaking. I didn't wait around to see if he could get through. I grabbed the guests and got them out of there to safety. We called the police, but by the time they got there, the guy was gone, and the place was quiet again. I sold the house not long after. I didn't want anything to do with it. I couldn't shake off that feeling that something had been seriously wrong in that basement. That guy, that encounter, it was like something out of a nightmare, something you can't explain and you don't want to remember. I still wonder who that guy was, what he was doing there. But honestly, I don't want to know. All I know is that I never felt safe going back there, and I never will. That night, that chilling encounter, it's something I'll never forget. I found this place on Airbnb, a nice little spot for a weekend getaway. The pictures were great, made it look cozy and inviting, so I booked it. But when we got there, things weren't like the photos at all. The house looked different, kinda run down, not at all like in the pictures. It was dark, even in the middle of the day. The air was stale, and there was this weird smell, like something old and musty. We checked the place out, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. The furniture was old, dusty, and the walls were stained. It was like we'd walked into a different place altogether. But the weirdest part? Some rooms were locked, doors sealed tight. The description never mentioned anything about locked rooms. It felt odd, made us uneasy. We didn't sign up for this. As the evening crept in, things started getting stranger. There were noises, creaks from the locked rooms. We tried to ignore it, thinking it was just an old house settling, but it felt too deliberate, too intentional. I decided to call the host, asking about the locked rooms and the state of the house. But the call went straight to voicemail, no response. It felt like we were alone in the middle of nowhere, trapped in this strange place. Then came the night, and that's when it got worse. The creaks turned into thuds, like footsteps pacing in the rooms upstairs. We were too scared to sleep, too scared to even move. It felt like we were being watched. We decided to leave. We packed our stuff in a rush, but as we tried to open the front door, it wouldn't budge. It was stuck, jammed tight. Panic set in, adrenaline rushing through us. I tried the windows, but they were sealed shut, too. We were trapped. That's when I realized this place, this house, it wasn't what it seemed. It was like a trap, something sinister hiding beneath the surface. We huddled in the living room, trying to make sense of it all. That's when we heard a whisper, soft and chilling, coming from one of the locked rooms. It was a woman's voice, repeating something we couldn't quite understand. We were terrified, frozen in fear. The voice kept getting louder, more insistent, like it was pleading with us. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like we were in serious danger. We needed to get out. I grabbed a chair, smashed the window with all my might, cutting my hand in the process. But as I tried to climb out, the window seemed to shrink, the opening narrowing, making it impossible to escape. The whispering grew louder, almost deafening. It felt like it was surrounding us, coming from every direction. I could see the terror in my partner's eyes, the same fear that gripped me. And then it stopped. The silence was eerie, deafening. We sat there, breathless, waiting. And that's when we heard it, a heavy knock on the front door, slow and deliberate. I hesitated, scared to even move. But the knocking grew louder, demanding. I mustered all my courage, got up, and slowly made my way to the door. As I reached for the doorknob, I felt this icy chill run down my spine. I turned it, and the door creaked open. But there was no one there, just an empty, dark hallway. We seized the opportunity, made a run for it, running as fast as we could. The house seemed to stretch, the corridors never ending, like a maze trying to keep us inside. Finally, we reached the front door, pushed it with all our might, and burst out into the night. The air was cold, the street quiet, but we didn't stop running until we reached the nearest town. We never looked back. That experience, that nightmare in that Airbnb, it was something I couldn't explain. The fear, the feeling of being trapped, it lingers. I still wonder what was really in that house, what secrets it held, but I don't think I want to know. That experience, it was like being in a horror movie, but it was real, too real. And it's something I wish I could forget. I remember booking an Airbnb for a weekend getaway with my friends. The place seemed perfect, great reviews, cozy vibes, and picturesque surroundings. But when we got there, it was off. The host seemed friendly at first, welcoming us with a warm smile. But there was something in his eyes, something that didn't quite match his smile. It was like a hint of something unsettling, something hidden beneath the surface. The house was spacious, but it felt empty, almost hollow. We shrugged it off, thinking it was just the initial jitters of being in a new place. But then things started to get weird. There were these notes left around the house, little messages that felt off. They were cryptic, almost like puzzles, telling us to complete tasks. It felt like a game, a twisted one. The first task was simple: find a key hidden in the house. Innocent enough, right? But the key led to more tasks, each one more bizarre and sinister than the last. Then came the rules. We had to follow these rules, weird instructions that made us feel like we were part of some experiment. Breaking the rules had consequences, and those consequences were terrifying. One rule was to never go into the basement. It was locked, sealed tight, and the host made it clear it was off limits. But the curiosity got the best of us. We wanted to know why. So, late at night, we tried to pick the lock, just to see what was down there. As the door creaked open, a chill ran down our spines. The basement was pitch black, but we could feel something ominous lurking within. We heard whispers, faint, almost inaudible. It was eerie, hair-raising. Suddenly, the host appeared out of nowhere, a cold, unsettling smile on his face. He didn't say anything, just stared at us with those unnerving eyes. We bolted, slammed the door shut, and locked it behind us. But it didn't end there. The tasks continued, each one pushing us further, making us question our sanity. We felt trapped, like puppets in a sick game controlled by our host. One task led us to a room filled with strange symbols, drawings on the walls that made no sense. It felt like we were being watched, observed by something unseen. Fear gnawed at us, and we wanted to leave, but it was as if the house wouldn't let us. The nights were the worst. The house seemed to come alive, strange noises echoing through the corridors. We barely slept, always on edge, always feeling like something was lurking in the shadows. Our phones stopped working. No signal, no way to call for help. We were cut off from the outside world, stuck in this twisted game orchestrated by our host. The final task was the most terrifying. It was a note, left on the kitchen table, telling us to confront our deepest fears. We didn't understand what it meant until we found ourselves in a room with mirrors all around. The mirrors showed us our fears, our darkest thoughts, as if they were coming to life. It was horrifying, seeing things that shouldn't exist, things that haunted our nightmares. That's when we realized we were losing our minds. The house, the tasks, the host, they were all playing with our sanity. It felt like we were slipping into madness, unable to distinguish reality from the twisted illusions. We had to get out. We had to break free from this nightmare. We made a run for it, ignoring the rules, ignoring the consequences. We smashed a window, climbed out, and sprinted into the night. We didn't stop running until we reached civilization, gasping for air, hearts racing. We looked back at the house, but it was like it had vanished into thin air. It was just an empty, dark silhouette in the distance. We never found out what that was all about, what kind of sick game we got dragged into. It was like a nightmare, a waking nightmare that felt all too real. And I still can't shake off that feeling that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't a game at all. My friends and I booked an Airbnb for a weekend getaway. It was supposed to be a fun break from our routine, but as soon as we arrived, things felt wrong. The house seemed normal enough from the outside, but as we stepped in, a chill ran down my spine. The atmosphere was off. The air felt heavy, and the silence was unnerving. There was a welcome note on the table, but the message was odd, something about hoping we have a memorable stay. It sounded more ominous than welcoming. We tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, thinking maybe it was just us, being paranoid or something. We unpacked and settled in, trying to make the best of it. But then things started getting weird. The house had these strange noises at night, creaks and whispers that made me question my sanity. Lights flickered randomly, and sometimes, I swear I saw shadows moving in the corners of my eyes. The first night, I couldn't sleep. The welcome message kept replaying in my mind. It was as if it held a secret, something sinister hidden in the words. I tried to push the thoughts away and went to bed, hoping for a better day tomorrow. But the next morning, things escalated. The TV turned on by itself, blaring static. It felt like someone or something was toying with us. We checked everything, thinking it might be a malfunction, but nothing seemed out of place. Then came the discovery. We found a hidden compartment in one of the closets. It was small, concealed behind a loose panel. Inside, there were old pictures, faded and torn, depicting strange rituals and ceremonies. It was unnerving, to say the least. We confronted the host, asking about the compartment and the bizarre welcome note. He dismissed our concerns, saying it must have been a mistake. But his smile didn't reach his eyes, and his voice had an edge to it that sent shivers down my spine. As the days passed, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. We felt like we were being watched. The house seemed to have a life of its own, doors closing on their own, objects moving without explanation. The feeling of dread kept growing, and it became hard to ignore. We decided to leave early, to get away from this eerie place. But when we tried to open the front door, it wouldn't budge. It was locked, and no matter how hard we tried, it wouldn't open. Panic set in. We checked the windows, but they were sealed shut. It was like the house was holding us captive, refusing to let us leave. We called the host, but there was no answer. We were trapped, and the sense of foreboding intensified. That night was the worst. We huddled together, fear clutching our hearts. Strange whispers echoed through the house, and the temperature dropped suddenly, sending a chill through the air. I saw figures moving in the darkness, fleeting glimpses of something unnatural. My friends heard it too, whispers, murmurs, voices that seemed to come from nowhere. We tried to stay calm, but the tension was unbearable. We were desperate to escape, to break free from this nightmare. We made one last attempt, ramming the door with all our strength. Finally, the door gave way. We bolted out, running into the night, not daring to look back until we reached safety. When we did, the house stood there, silent and still, as if nothing had happened. We reported the incident, but the host was nowhere to be found. It was like he vanished into thin air. We never found out what was truly going on in that house, what kind of twisted game we got sucked into. The memories still haunt me. That feeling of being watched, the sense of dread that clung to every corner of that house. It's a reminder that sometimes, reality can be more terrifying than anything we can imagine. Me and my buddies decided to book an Airbnb for our annual getaway. The pictures looked great, and the reviews were positive. We were excited for a week of relaxation and fun. But when we arrived at the place, something felt off. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, but as we stepped inside, a sense of unease settled in. The host was welcoming, but there was something about his demeanor that didn't sit right. He seemed nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. We brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just busy or stressed. The first few days went fine, but strange things started happening. We'd hear hushed conversations late at night, but when we checked, nobody was there. One day, while searching for some extra blankets in the closet, I stumbled upon a hidden compartment. It was small, almost unnoticeable, tucked behind a panel. Inside, there were stacks of cash and what seemed to be illegal documents. We were shocked and didn't know what to do. We wanted to leave, but we were afraid of the consequences of stumbling into something way beyond our understanding. We decided to act like we didn't see anything, to keep up the facade. The host started acting even weirder after that. He'd often leave the house for long periods, and strangers would show up at odd hours. They'd exchange packages, always looking around suspiciously. One night, while we were watching TV, the front door burst open, and two men stormed in, looking for something. They were aggressive, demanding to know if we found anything. We were terrified, fearing for our lives. We denied knowing anything, but they didn't believe us. It was a tense standoff until the host arrived unexpectedly. He managed to calm the situation down, but it was clear that we were now part of something dangerous. We felt trapped, not knowing who to trust or what to do. We were in way over our heads. The next day, the host told us that we needed to leave immediately, making it clear that our presence was no longer welcome. We packed in a hurry, not daring to ask any questions. But as we left, we saw police cars parked down the street. It seemed like something big was happening, and we didn't want to stick around to find out what. Even after we left, we couldn't shake off the fear. We were paranoid, constantly looking over our shoulders, afraid that someone might come after us. It was a chilling experience that made us realize how easily things can go wrong. We never found out the full extent of what was happening, but it was clear that the host was involved in something illicit. We reported the incident to the authorities, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. It was a lesson learned the hard way. Sometimes, a seemingly perfect vacation can turn into a nightmare in the blink of an eye. The whole experience left us shaken and wary of ever booking an Airbnb again. We were just lucky to have made it out in one piece. Me and my friends rented this Airbnb for a weekend getaway. It looked perfect from the pictures. But when we got there, there was this weird door in the hallway that was locked, and the host didn't mention anything about it. The house was old, and there was something eerie about it. Creaky floorboards, dim lighting, the whole deal. But hey, we were on vacation, right? We decided to have fun and ignore the odd vibes. On the second night, curiosity got the best of us. We found the door slightly ajar. We couldn't resist. I mean, wouldn't you check it out if you saw a secret door in a creepy old house? Behind it was this dusty room, cluttered with old furniture and covered in cobwebs. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But then, in the corner, we saw something that made us freeze. A pile of old, weathered photographs and some strange objects. The photos were unsettling, depicting a family from a long time ago. But there was something off about them. They all had these dark circles drawn around the faces, as if someone had marked them out. As we continued snooping, we found a journal hidden under a loose floorboard. It was filled with cryptic entries, ranting about some kind of ritual and the need for cleansing. That's when we heard it, the sound of footsteps. We froze, looking at each other in terror. We weren't alone. Someone was in the house with us. We quickly shoved everything back where we found it and rushed out of the room, shutting the door behind us. We tried to act normal, but we were spooked. We didn't dare mention what we found to the host. We didn't want to cause any trouble. That night, we barely slept. Every creak, every noise had us on edge. We felt like we were being watched. But we tried to convince ourselves that it was just our imagination. The next morning, we decided to take another look at the secret room. We needed to know more about what we stumbled upon. But when we returned, the door was sealed shut. It was like it had never been opened. We were freaked out and confused. How did it lock on its own? Did the host find out we went in there? The whole situation was getting weirder by the minute. That day, the atmosphere in the house was tense. We felt trapped, like there was something sinister lingering around us. And that's when things got even worse. The power went out, plunging the house into darkness. We stumbled around, trying to find some flashlights or candles, anything to light up the place. As we fumbled around in the dark, a strange smell hit us. It was foul, like something rotting. We followed it to the hallway, and that's when we saw blood oozing out from under the sealed door. We panicked. Was someone hurt? Was there something terrible behind that door? We debated calling the police, but were afraid of what they might find. Plus, we weren't sure if they'd believe our story about the sealed room. The smell intensified, and we couldn't take it anymore. We decided to leave, packing our things in a frenzy. We left a note for the host, saying there was an emergency and that we had to leave immediately. As we were getting into our car, we heard sirens in the distance. We didn't stick around to see what was happening. We just wanted to get as far away from the house as possible. We never found out what was behind that sealed door. We tried searching online for any history about the house or the family in the photos, but there was nothing. It was like the place didn't exist. That experience haunted us. We couldn't shake off the feeling that something dark and twisted lurked in that house. It was a chilling reminder that sometimes curiosity leads you into places you shouldn't go. We never spoke about it again, but that night in the Airbnb was etched into our memories. It made us question what secrets lay hidden behind closed doors and what horrors might be lurking just out of sight. I was looking forward to a weekend getaway with my friends. We found this Airbnb in a serene countryside setting. Pictures made it look perfect, a cozy little place to relax and have fun. But things took a nightmarish turn real quick. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, all excited, ready for a great time. The host, an older man, seemed friendly. He showed us around, gave us the keys, and left. But something felt off about him. It was probably just me overthinking, I thought. We settled in, unpacked our stuff, and decided to explore the house. It was quaint, cozy, but there was this one locked room. The host brushed it off, saying it was his private collection, strictly off limits. As the night crept in, we started feeling uneasy. The house was quiet, a bit too quiet for comfort. And then we stumbled upon it, the room we were told to stay away from. It was just a wooden door with a simple lock, nothing extraordinary, but the air around it felt heavy, ominous. We joked about the forbidden room, but decided to respect the host's wishes and moved on. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere got heavier. I could feel a sense of unease settling in all of us. It was as if the walls were closing in on us. We tried to lighten the mood, crack some jokes, but it didn't seem to help. That's when we heard a faint sound, like metal clinking against metal. It was coming from the forbidden room. My heart skipped a beat, and my friends looked equally scared. We were frozen, staring at the locked door. Curiosity got the better of us. One of my friends, let's call him Alex, dared to approach the door. He tried to turn the knob, but it was locked, just as the host had said. We were all a bit on edge now, feeling a mix of curiosity and dread. But then the sound stopped abruptly. It was replaced by an eerie silence. We glanced at each other, unsure of what to do next. Should we ask the host? Or just leave it be? We decided to drop it and try to enjoy the night. But the unease lingered. It was like that locked door had cast a shadow over the whole house. We decided to call it a night, hoping a good night's sleep would rid us of these eerie feelings. I wish we could have slept peacefully, but that's not what happened. In the dead of the night, we were startled awake by a loud crash. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. We were on our feet in an instant, hearts pounding. Alex was brave enough to investigate. He cautiously approached the forbidden room. What he found made our blood run cold. The door was ajar, slightly open, revealing a room filled with the most terrifying collection of items I've ever seen. Weapons, knives, chains, and other lethal items adorned the walls. It was like a nightmare come to life. We were petrified. None of us knew what to do or how to react. We were guests in this stranger's house, and now we were staring at a collection of weapons. As we stood there, processing what we were seeing, we heard footsteps behind us. It was the host. He was holding something sharp and menacing. His expression was cold, devoid of any warmth or hospitality we had seen before. In that moment, we knew we had to get out. Survival instincts kicked in, and we bolted for the door, not looking back. We didn't know what was happening, why this was happening, but we were running for our lives. We fled into the dark night, not stopping until we were far away from the house. We called the police, told them everything, but by the time they arrived, the host and his collection were gone. It still haunts me, that night in the Airbnb. What was that collection for? Why did the host have it? And what were his intentions? We never got answers. We were just grateful we made it out alive, but the terror of that night lingers in my mind. That Airbnb looked so innocent, so welcoming in the pictures, but beneath its facade lay something sinister and dangerous. It was a chilling reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the scariest things are the ones hidden in plain sight. I'm not sure if you're pulling my leg or really want to hear about that horrific night. Okay, brace yourself. So, it was a chilly weekend getaway, and a bunch of us decided to rent this cozy little cabin in the woods. Looked like something out of a travel magazine, rustic, charming, and nestled among the trees. But appearances, well, they can deceive. First impressions with the host were unusual. He had this aloof, almost creepy vibe, not the friendly, welcoming attitude you'd expect. Anyway, we thought, maybe he's just shy or something. We started settling in, and there were these small oddities, nothing too serious at first. Little things misplaced, subtle signs of intrusion. Initially, we brushed it off, thought we were just being paranoid city dwellers in the woods. As the sun began to set, that's when things took a strange turn. We were out on the porch, enjoying the tranquility of the surroundings when a sudden noise cut through the silence, a distant scream echoing through the woods. We looked at each other, all spooked. Dismissing it as some animal or a prank, we tried to get back to having a good time, but a sense of unease lingered. It was like an invisible weight on our shoulders, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. Later that evening, we stumbled upon a locked room in the cabin. The host had explicitly told us it was off limits, but curiosity got the better of us. One of us, let's call him Mark, fiddled with the lock, tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like a silent warning, don't go there. Fast forward to the night, things started getting seriously weird. We heard eerie sounds outside, footsteps creeping around the cabin, and whispers. Not the kind you hear from your friends, no, these were gut-churning, spine-tingling whispers that made our hair stand on end. The electricity went off, plunging us into pitch darkness. Our phones barely had a signal. Panic began to set in, and we tried to keep our cool, sticking together, trying to reassure each other. But in our hearts, we knew something was very, very wrong. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. A chilling, relentless knock that sent shivers down our spines. We hesitated, debated, but eventually, Mark, the brave soul, decided to check it out. I remember the look on his face when he opened the door, shock, disbelief, and sheer horror. There, standing in the moonlight, was a figure, a shadowy, sinister silhouette, clad in darkness. It felt like the embodiment of fear itself. Before any of us could react, the figure bolted, disappearing into the woods. We were frozen, stunned, and terrified. We wanted to leave, to escape that nightmare, but then we realized the keys were missing. The cabin was locked from the outside. Trapped. Our hearts raced, pounding in unison as we realized the gravity of the situation. Panic set in, and we scrambled, trying to find a way out. That's when we found it, a hidden door. A secret passage that led to that forbidden room. We couldn't resist, our curiosity overpowered by fear and dread. What we found there, oh God, it was the stuff of nightmares. Pictures, documents, news clippings, all linking our host to a series of unsolved disappearances in the area. It was like a serial killer's hideout, a grim reminder of the horrors that took place there. Our minds were racing, trying to piece it all together. The screams we heard earlier, the eerie signs, the strange happenings, it all made horrifying sense now. We were in the den of a predator, a place where unspeakable things happened. Time was slipping away, and we knew we had to get out, had to escape. But the realization that we were trapped, locked in by this maniac, it hit us hard. Our only option was to run, to flee into the woods and hope for the best. We gathered what little courage we had left and made a dash for it. Each step felt like an eternity, our hearts pounding in sync with our terrified breaths. We didn't look back, running blindly into the darkness, praying to make it out alive. We finally stumbled upon a road, and in the distance, we saw the lights of a passing car. We waved, screamed, pleaded for help. The car stopped, and we frantically explained the horror we had just escaped. The police were called, and we gave them every detail, every grim discovery we stumbled upon in that cabin. But when they reached the place, there was no sign of our deranged host or the evidence of his gruesome crimes. We were shaken to the core, haunted by that night. It was like a horror movie turned real, a nightmare that felt all too tangible. We got lucky, made it out alive, but the memories of that night still haunt me. The twisted mind behind the cabin, the horrors he might have inflicted on those who never made it out, it's something I never want to face again. I woke up to a quiet morning, thinking it would be a regular day. The guests who'd stayed over had booked the place for the weekend. I usually leave them be during their stay, don't want to intrude on their privacy. But that day, when they checked out, I knew something was off. As I walked into the house, the air felt different, heavy almost. The usual fresh smell of pine and wood was replaced by something acrid, like burnt plastic. My heart started to race, sensing something wasn't right. The door creaked open, and there it was. The house was a mess. Broken glass scattered across the floor, furniture overturned, and some rooms looked ransacked. It was like a tornado had ripped through the place. I felt a chill down my spine. I rushed through the rooms, checking everything, trying to make sense of the chaos. The kitchen was a war zone, plates shattered, drawers pulled out, and food strewn everywhere. The living room looked like a battlefield, couches overturned, pillows ripped apart. I found a note on the table, scrawled in a hasty script, "Sorry for the mess. Sudden family emergency. Had to leave. We'll send money for damage." I read it, trying to make sense of the situation, but my gut told me something darker had unfolded here. I mean, what kind of family emergency would cause this level of destruction? I approached the hallway, and that's when I saw it, the broken photo frame, a picture of a happy family, the glass shattered over their smiles. My heart sank. This wasn't just some impulsive mess, something deeper had happened here. I noticed a faint smell, metallic, almost a scent that made my stomach turn. It led me to the guest room, the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open and my breath hitched. The room was a disaster, sheets tossed around, curtains ripped, but that wasn't the worst part. There, on the floor, was a dark stain, a stain that looked eerily like blood. My heart was racing, the realization sinking in. What on earth had happened here? The guests had left, and I was left with this horror show, this eerie aftermath. I called the police, trying to keep calm as I explained what I'd found. They arrived quickly, and as they surveyed the scene, their faces grew grim. They took photos, dusted for fingerprints, and asked me endless questions. But none of it seemed to provide answers. Hours felt like an eternity as they combed through the house. I was sitting there, shaken, not knowing what to do. They assured me they'd investigate, but in that moment, I felt so vulnerable, so exposed. As they left, I was alone in the eerie silence of the house. The horror of what had happened lingered in the air. I tried to piece it together, to understand what could have led to this chaos. But there were no answers, just questions that gnawed at me. Days passed, and the police investigation yielded no clues. The house was back in order, but the eerie feeling remained. It was like a shadow had settled over the place, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake off. I tried reaching out to the guests, but all my attempts were met with silence. It felt like a bad dream, one I couldn't wake up from. I thought about the stains, the ransacked rooms, the broken photo, and that note. It all felt too bizarre, too unsettling. I couldn't bear the weight of the unanswered questions, the unease that had settled in. It haunted me, made me second-guess every creak, every shadow in that house. What had happened that day, and why? It was a nightmare without an end, a chilling mystery that remained unsolved. The guests had left, but their presence lingered, not in the joyous memories they should have left behind, but in the haunting, unnerving mystery they'd brought to my doorstep. It was a day I wish I could forget, a day that still sends shivers down my spine.